Hello, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sascha Fahrbach. The message from NATO headquarters ahead of today's ministerial meeting has been one of confidence. Secretary General Mark Rutte says the alliance is in, quote, a good place today, as ministers discuss force readiness, nuclear deterrence, and the implementation of new defense plans designed to respond to a more challenging security environment. Joining us now to discuss it further is Dr. Eoin McNamara, researcher at the Finnish Institute of International Affairs. Good to have you back with us. Welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning. So, in a good place today, what do you think that means? Forces, is that NATO? What does he mean by that? He just said that earlier this morning on Thursday.
Well, I think, what a 6 months it's been since Greenland, when NATO's debt was being pronounced again. Of course, we've had bits and pieces of a US drawdown this spring. But at the same time, as we're seeing with these exercises in Poland, as we've been seeing with some of Rutte's crisis diplomacy with the US President Donald Trump, some of these issues, NATO, Europe, and Rutte himself as the chair of the alliance has found a response for. And I think the most significant thing in Rutte's statement today is that NATO is looking forward and making progress, despite some of the tumultuous things that have already happened this year. And I think that is where his positivity is being generated from.
So positivity, if we look at also what's on the agenda, if we're looking at nuclear deterrence, we see conventional forces, long-range precision strike systems, all that combined. How significant is that? That's all coming together. Is that normal or is that something unique?
NATO has always been an alliance, that has adapted, an alliance in flux, an alliance that will adapt its force posture. So I think what we're seeing now, as you mentioned, with these upgrades or these adjustments in capabilities, this is the product somewhat of more European defense spending, greater European political urgency and political guidance on the need to adapt NATO, and I think also a response from the US signaling that it needs to do less in Europe and the Europeans need to do more. So we're seeing indications of that here now play out in terms of adapting those hard capabilities that you mentioned.
Mm-hmm. And also, you mentioned increased spending. That's something that we've talked about before. That's something that many countries in Europe are doing and across NATO as well. Is that, let's say, at a level that it needs to be? The United States has continually in the last few months said that it's not enough. And also, what's the significance really of also Secretary of War or Secretary of Defense, Mr. Hegseth, also present there? That's something that doesn't happen all too often.
Yeah, I think Hegseth's presence is to be welcomed. I think he's played the role these past 6 months of somewhat of a kind of a shock jock, if I'm to use that term, Secretary of War or Secretary of Defense within the alliance. Sometimes I think this has gone somewhat overboard in creating too much tension, too much transatlantic tension. But yes, on what you mentioned about defense spending, I think when we get up to the 5% that was agreed last year, essentially 3.5% on hard defense assets and another 1.5% on social enablers that enable the defense posture. That is a very significant increase for Europe. And that's very, very important. But I think there is often sometimes too much discussion on the cash side of the equation. That's the input side. But the big test now is converting that cash side of the equation into real effective defense capabilities that Europe can use to signal strong deterrence to Russia. That is what is crucial. So there's an input side here, but the output side is where deterrence is generated. So that's very important, and it's very important in Poland as well. We're seeing very significant defense spending in Poland, and the question is how quickly can we get military modernization in Poland, given the current challenges on the eastern flank? So yes, progress has been made, but it's hard deterrence capabilities that we need to get out of this process.
And also, like you mentioned, we talked about the eastern flank of NATO, but I'm also curious, what do you make of, we've had this joint statement yesterday at the G7, a lot of unity on paper. So what does that mean? How do you interpret this, let's say now 24 hours later? What does this mean for Ukraine? Is Ukraine better off after that summit in G7?
I think so. I mean, it's certainly better off with, political unity being declared rather than political fragmentation and infighting within the West. But as I said in an interview with your station, I think last week, I mean, a lot will depend on whether we can turn up the pressure on Vladimir Putin, because, of course, when sides are willing to make peace, willing to make the painful concessions involved, they must feel a hurting stalemate. They must feel the hurt. So this political unity within the West, within the G7 on Ukraine, it must be converted at this time to turning up the pressure on Vladimir Putin through military support for Ukraine, through economic support for Ukraine, and through much tougher sanctions. And as we've seen with sanctions packages and with the sanctions debate around Europe right now, there is scope still to turn up the pressure through sanctions, options that the Europeans are currently not taking.
Mm-hmm. And also, I mean, you mentioned pressure. Let's also talk about reassurance. If we're looking at the eastern flank, particularly the Baltic states, those are countries that have very much been, let's say, at the front line of what Russia could do. That's still a defense strategy. Recently, given what's happened, also what the defense minister of Denmark has said, security here, our security begins in Latvia. Now, Latvia has also hosted, I believe, Swedish troops. They still host those today. There's a battle group there. So what do you make of his statement there from the Danish side, and how important is Latvia and all this in the Baltics?
Yes, that NATO, what they call it now, Forward Land Forces battle group. It's in fact led under Canadian leadership. The battle group in Estonia under British leadership, and an expanding battle group under German leadership in Lithuania. So it's a very multinational presence. US troops rotate in and out of the Baltic states. So on Denmark, I think Denmark has always been a long supporter since the Baltic states restored their independence in 1991. Denmark has been one of the leading voices in the Nordics on the need to enhance Baltic security, was a very big supporter very early on of NATO enlargement to the Baltic states. So yes, I definitely think that perspective is there, that the Nordic states, other European states, that they see Germany, Poland as well. Of course, Poland is an eastern flank nation as well, that they see that their security begins in Latvia. And when we think about the Nordics specifically, integration here is very high. I just finished a paper published yesterday on critical infrastructure in the Baltic Sea, and on all the electricity connections, the energy connections, the data cables, a lot of Nordic investment in the Baltic states as well. So I think what Danish leaders are saying, it's very, very natural to think that this is a result of very successful integration in the Nordic Baltic region, and that integration and that prosperity needs to be respected. So I think that statement from the Danish minister illustrates things very, very well, given how things have been going in this region over the past 2 decades even.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's one defense minister out of many, but we've seen more and more of an integration, closer cooperation, bilaterals between many Nordic states and also Poland in particular, but also the Baltic states. Is that, in your sense, the new, let's say, reality? Is the reliance on defense in the Baltic coming more from the Nordic states than it would have come from the United States some years back?
Yeah, I mean, this has always been discussed. I mean, the states of the region mentioned Polish defense spending. We mentioned Poland's military modernization program. We've also, I mean, Baltic states have stepped up with extra defense spending and more national military exercises. You know, if you look at Estonia's defense mobilization situation with its military reserve, with its volunteer defense league, Kites Elite. And if you look at a country like Finland, very, very strong independent defense capacity for a small nation. And there's been lots of cooperation within different regional formats. We think of the Joint Expeditionary Force, the JEF, Nordefco, Nordic Defense Cooperation. But saying all that, and even despite all these regional efforts, you still need power involved. I mean, the Nordic states, the Baltic states are still quite small. They still need that support from the great powers. From the United States in the region, we've seen this. We've heard discussions of France stepping up some of its presence in the region, and we've seen Britain. Britain has been very active as a defense actor in the Nordic Baltic region, as kind of a framework nation, a coordinating nation in the region. We've seen this through the UK or British leadership of the Joint Expeditionary Force. So yes, defense relations in the region are very enmeshed at the national level, at the regional level, and at the NATO and EU level as well. But it seems to be clicking at the minute. It has come together, and an effective posture is being generated.
Just one quick line. I know we're conscious of time here. Really quick, just one line about Gallant Boar. This exercise that's happening right now includes over 6,500 Polish forces, I think also French and Lithuanians. How significant is that exercise right now?
I think it is quite significant in that particular region of Poland, because you've got Kaliningrad there, you've got the Suwałki Gap, very, very important to guard that point. I mean, Suwałki Gap, the pressure on it isn't as significant as it was once envisaged because of Finnish and Swedish membership in NATO. NATO communications, NATO logistics can be accommodated further north as well. There's more options there. However, it's still very, very important if NATO troops need to travel to the Baltic states. So clear lines, freedom of action, freedom of logistics in that part of Poland is very, very important for the defense of NATO's wider eastern flank. And that is a very important focal point when we look on at these exercises.
Yeah, so not just host nations, but as you said, many nations, multilateral nations, all together for this very key gap, but also across the eastern flank. Thanks so much for that. Always a pleasure having you. Dr. Eoin McNamara, thank you so much for that.
Thank you very much, Sascha.
And thank you for watching. That concludes World Talks, but stay right here on TVP World for more news and commentary. Goodbye.